I am delighted to be here. I'm delighted to be with practitioners who are asking how-to questions. How do we actually get behavior to change? How do we begin to actually apply that in ways that can have an impact on the issue of climate change? How do we tackle that in a way that allows us to begin to have an impact on this issue beyond just your immediate buildings that you are directly responsible for? So what I want to address with you is several things. I want to talk about what we have seen as key design principles that we have applied to our work over the last couple of decades. Then I want to talk about how we have utilized those design principles to deal with environmental behavior change and our 20 years of research around that in particular. And then I want to talk about how to take those design principles and that knowledge of behavioral change, ecological or environmental behavioral change, and how to address the issue of climate change explicitly and lay out a national strategy that we've been rolling out over the last 4 years that looks at how to scale up behavior change within a community and then community-wide to have an impact on the national climate change issue. So that's where we're heading. And what I want to begin to do as part of this conversation is to really look at how to make this as practical and relevant as possible. Probably most of it is, but we haven't worked explicitly with the majority of our research with multifamily dwellings. Some percentage of them, certainly, of our work has been there, but I want to begin to look at how to expand that so it's as directly relevant as possible. So we're going to start with the big picture. One of the things that's often missing in the climate change conversation is time. We have to make a lot of change in a short period of time. So how do we make significant impact on the climate change issue in the time frames we're being told we have? This is a lot different than how do I just change the behavior of the tenants in my buildings. This is how do we change the behavior of a country, of which some subset will be people who live in your buildings. So we have to think about time. And as we've looked at how to actually address climate change, we've identified 3 strategies. One is new technologies, the kind of thing that Jonathan is talking about deploying in some of his buildings is a subset of the larger question of new technologies. What we found is that new technologies are not going to come online at the scale and at the time frame that we need to make the impact. So this is not a strategy we can deploy right away. Another one is renewable energy getting scaled up. Same. It's not designed at the ability to scale and around the ability to deploy it in the time frames we need to address climate change with. We have to get those working, but we can't get them up to scale in the time frames that our scientists are telling us we need to work with. What we have, though, is conservation. And not just conservation at the residential level, but conservation across the board. That is the low-hanging fruit. That buys us time for some of these longer-term strategies to scale up. So we need to make rapid transformation around this issue, but how? So as we've looked hard at how one creates social change, we've identified that there are traditional strategies of legislation, passing laws, command and control, taxation, encouraging people to participate in change by virtue of economic incentives, positive or negative, effectively paying people to change, protest, which doesn't get us that far on the climate change issue, because at the end of the day, it's not a solution, but it's an impetus. So they're not designed for rapid and fundamental transformation, the current strategies. So what we've been looking at over the last 3 decades is how can you actually design transformative social change strategies. We call that social change 2.0. And I'll speak to these design principles a bit. We've identified 5 design principles. Why these design principles are important to spend some time with is because at the end of the day, when you leave here with all this input, you are what I would call social architects. You have to design a strategy that can have an impact. You have to get people to change behavior. You have to scale that in a building or across many buildings or across a community. These are the design principles that we have imbued or embedded, if you will, in our strategy. And if you understand them, and by the way, this is all laid out pretty in detail in my book, so those of you that have copies can do the deeper dive there. So the first one is how do we empower people to take personal responsibility to adopt the new behaviors needed for social change. That has been the heart of our work. How do you empower people to adopt the needed new behaviors? And the key is, what does it take to get people to take personal responsibility? If you can't pay them to change, if you can't force them to change, how do you get them to want to change? The second design principle, and again, this is also embedded in everything I'll be talking about, is the idea of social innovation. What we are looking to do here are to create transformative social innovations that can address unmet problems and opportunities. The third design principle, and this is a key piece of the puzzle, is how do we create the social innovations in such a way they can change the game? At the end of the day, if we get people in our buildings to live a greener lifestyle, how do we turn that into a game changer? Is that by itself significant enough? I don't think so, unless we can figure out how to design it such that it can change the game and be a tipping point for a larger scaling up across cities or across the world so we can tackle this issue. So right from the beginning, how do we create game changers, transformative social innovations that are not just about small, marginal, incremental changes, but can fundamentally change the game? We design with that from the beginning, we have the potential to have an impact if scaled and if successful. So how do we design with that kind of context in mind? The fourth thing we have found over our 20 years of work or 30 years, but specifically in the environmental behavior change world, 20, is that to be successful, we have to bring all the players together. How do you get a design of a transformative social innovation that allows everyone to collaborate, that allows everyone to come together? So there's no other. If we spend a lot of our time looking to find who the bad person is, that diverts a lot of our energy. And at the end of the day, we are all part of the problem, and we can all be part of the solution, particularly in this case. And the fifth one is, if you can't actually force people to change, you can't pay them to change, there's not enough money in the system, how do you disseminate? How do you get a transformative social innovation designed to be replicable and scalable? And specifically, the key to that is this notion of disproportionate leverage, disproportionate influence leverage. How to get a small group of people, like this group sitting here, leverage so that you can have an impact on the built environment, specifically multifamily housing in this country. That would be looking for disproportionate influence leveraged. Or if you get a small group within a building, how do you get that disproportionate influence leveraged? Or a few buildings in a community.